For the past 2 years, I've been shooting photos on motion picture film stocks. And if you're a filmmaker, here's why you should too. So this hobby project started out a few years ago when I bought an old Canon 7. Starting with a Europe trip in 2022, I've been shooting on a variety of motion picture film stocks, some current and some very expired, in order to get a better grasp on how to shoot film. I think most filmmakers should attempt this, because one day you might end up doing so on a professional film set, and in the lead up to that day, you'll want to be prepared and ready. Cinematographer Hoyt van Hoytema famously declared in his Oscar speech,
"To all aspiring filmmakers out there, I would like to say, please try shooting that incredible new hip thing called celluloid. It's much easier than you think, and it makes things look so much better."
I personally haven't yet been able to successfully pitch shooting on film for any of my projects. But if that day ever comes, I know I'll be more prepared. And that's because I've spent time testing Kodak's motion picture range, 50D, 250D, and 500T. And that alone has taught me things like, film has a very high dynamic range, especially in the highlights. Overexposing digital is a big no-no because of highlight clipping. But on film, you can overexpose up to 5 stops and still have all the information on the negative. In fact, film has the opposite exposure philosophy to digital. With a digital camera, you expose to protect highlights. On film, you always expose to get clean shadows. And legitimately overexposed Kodak Vision 3 film doesn't clip highlights in the way you'd expect. Instead, you'll get intense color shifting, which can be tricky to remove in post. Also, you'll realize how important post-production is as part of the film process. Some film photographers will claim this next point as sacrilege, but I edit every photo, simply because a motion picture film stock is also just a baseline for a color grading process. I've shot Kodak Vision 3 50D and had it processed in 3 different labs, each yielding very different results. That just goes to show how important scanning is, and carefully picking where and how you get that done. I've also shot Vision 3 50D in Super 8, but I'm not really claiming this as a big learning curve because my camera, the Canon 310 XL, has its own auto exposure system. There's also Ektachrome E100, a positive slide film that gained a lot of notoriety after it was used on Euphoria Season 2. I would not only suggest, but implore that you test this film stock on your stills camera before you ever shoot a project with it. You only have around 5 to 7 stops of dynamic range, so avoid contrasty situations and expose carefully. This is especially the case if you develop an ECN2, like they did with Euphoria, which makes the image even more contrasty. Overexposed slides can still look cool, and you'll ultimately end up with not only a digital scan, but also frames that you can hang on your wall. And finally, I've tried Kodak's Eastman XX 5222, which has been around for some time, was used on Schindler's List, and is still being produced today. The second reason why you should shoot on film is because it teaches you about the history of motion picture. Digital cinematography is still fresh in the context of history, only really popularized by the Arri Alexa Classic in the 2010s. This switch meant most movies have been shot on some variation of that same sensor, putting more power into a different creative look through tools like lenses, filters, and color grading. But before that, cinematographers would determine their look on film stocks, not different types of lenses. There was much more availability out there, with the likes of Fuji, Ilford, and Agfa all producing stocks for use in movies. And that's not even mentioning how many types of stocks Kodak and Eastman were producing. Most of these are now gone or really hard to acquire, but I've managed to get my hands on some older stocks thanks to Mr. Negative in Melbourne. Last year, I shot a roll of Eastman EXR 50D in Mumia and Mystery Island, which stopped being sold in 2006. It's been used on films like Pulp Fiction, Bourne Identity, and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Expired motion picture stocks generally don't do so well over time, so expect some funky effects. I've also shot Kodak's previous motion picture line, Vision 2, in Vanuatu, which held up a little bit better. Mr. Negative also recently stocked a few of Fuji's discontinued motion picture films, including the Eterna line and F64D. I've had a huge amount of fun with these, and they've instantly become some of my favorites, which is a shame because they're in finite supply and are rarely respooled for film photography. Editing green color shifts has been a fun challenge, and you definitely have to overexpose each roll accordingly. For example, I shot f64D 3 stops over, so almost at just ASA 6. This is a stop for each decade it's been expired since 2005, and then another stop over that just because it brings richness out of the colors. Shooting on expired motion picture film isn't just a great conversation starter with some industry veterans who've done this for years. It also shows a huge amount of initiative in understanding how we got to where we are now. And the final reason you should shoot on film combines the previous reasons with something a little lame and likely which you've heard before, which is that it helps you to be present. Realistically, unless you find your way into a larger budget project, opportunities to work with film on a set will always be limited due to financial constraints. So essentially, all of this advice is pointless unless you focus on the most important thing, composing your images to tell a story. The cost of each frame and finite space on each roll makes every shot meaningful. There's plenty of times where I could fire away, but now I save myself for a moment when I see the right ingredients of subject, lighting, and colors combined. Motion picture film also has a higher fidelity and lower price than most film photography stocks, making it the perfect entry point for anyone who wants to get into this. In a world where digital cinematography encourages smash and grab work, being able to slow down and think about what matters is a valuable mindset to bring back on set. And not only that, you have learned a respect for the craft, having printed what's in front of you onto a tangible, physical object, rather than ones and zeros. When shooting Fuji's expired and rare stocks, I know that everything I do is important, because this might be the last time I'll ever be able to shoot on these stocks. It takes away a lot of the arrogance, and can help you reassess your priorities as a filmmaker. And at the very least, going back in time to this seemingly outdated format is likely the best way for us to develop as filmmakers and go forward into the future.